So it's 4 o'clock right now. It looks like we still have people joining us, but we'll get started with the introduction and just an overview of the events that we have for today. Again, welcome everybody. This is the second Community Conversations event that the town of Wayland has hosted. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Jordan Remy. I work in the Board of Selectmen and the Town Administrator's Office. I'm going to be hosting the event today with the help of our moderator, Richard Lee. So I wanted to start with a quick introduction of what Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is, as well as just an overview of all the events that we have today. So firstly, we have Margie Yamamoto. She's going to be speaking as our guest. She's going to be speaking about her family's life as survivors of a World War II internment camp for the Japanese Americans, and also what her subsequent family life in the United States was after that. And then we're going to be followed by a presentation by Terry Livingston of the Wayland Lived Experiences Project. And then after we have her presentation, we're going to be going into breakout rooms for about 30 minutes. And we're going to rejoin towards the end of the event for a musical performance by Mino Cho. And we've also tried to provide some time after 6 o'clock to have some bit of a reflection period, give us a little bit more of an informal type of a setting for tonight, but still have the opportunity to have the presentations be heard by our excellent guest tonight. Speakers, thank you. I couldn't think of the word speakers. So we're gonna get into what a little bit of the history of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is. I thought it was interesting to learn about some of the background and how it got started. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter issued a proclamation for Asian and Pacific American Heritage Week. And so it only started off as a week, and then for about a decade after, each president had issued a similar proclamation until 1990 when
You're muted.
Jordan, you're on mute.
Okay.
Muted again.
Muted.
I don't know why. I'm sorry. I'm trying to admit people and talk at the same time. But anyway, so 1990, President George H.W. Bush issued a proclamation to make Asian Pacific Heritage Month last an entire month. And then subsequently in 1992, it permanently passed by Congress to have it as an entire month. Flash forward to 2009, President Obama officially declared it to be the month to be Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So that way it would be all inclusive of Pacific Islanders as well, not just Americans from the Pacific. So I thought that was an interesting background to learn more about Asian and Pacific Heritage Month. So with that, we'll be transitioning into our moderator for the night, Richard Lee. So Richard Lee is a Wayland-based freelance writer, visual artist, and a humanitarian. He's worked as a journalist for the various international outlets, including the Associated Press, the Times, and the Sunday Times, UK, Dow Jones, Newswire, and the Korea Times. His poetry has been published in numerous literary journals and has exhibited multimedia installations in Cambridge and New York City. So Richard was 8 years old when he immigrated to Northampton, Massachusetts from Seoul, South Korea. He took part in his first public protest as a junior high student. As a junior in high school, in a reaction to the Soviet shooting down of Korean Airlines 007 that killed all 270 on board, including a U.S. congressman. And he's been a human rights advocate ever since. Richard has been a Wayland resident for 6 years, and prior to moving to Wayland, he lived in Newton for 20 years. He considers himself to be a proud Korean American, proud Korean and Asian American, and he's also a fluent speaker of the Korean language. So Richard, thank you for that introduction. I'll turn it over to you to introduce our guest speaker for the night.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. It's a beautiful day, and I know you could have been doing other things, but it means a lot to me that so many of you are here today. Let's begin by saying an acknowledgement that we in Wayland occupy lands that once belonged to the Pawtucket, Nipmuc, and the Massachusetts nations. While this acknowledgement does not and cannot suffice in righting the wrongs committed against the people of these nations, I am hopeful that an expanded commitment to equity for the surviving descendants of these once great indigenous cultures and nations is pledged. Let's learn to treat each other far, far better than we have in the past. I also would like to say a few words about the diversity of Asian Americans. Flying from Tokyo, Japan to Mumbai, India is roughly the same distance as flying from Boston to Tunis, Africa, or Boston to Poland, Warsaw, Poland. There are so many countries, cultures, separate histories, and languages in that span. Asian Americans are Chinese, Indians, Japanese, Indonesians, Malaysians, Filipinos, Koreans, Thai, Vietnamese, Pakistanis, Singaporeans, Laotians, Burmese, Cambodians, Bangladeshis, Nepalese, Tibetans, Mongolians, Hmongs, and on and on. And we haven't even gotten to the islanders yet. We are Protestants, Catholics, Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus, Moonies, Jehovah's Witnesses, atheists, agnostics, rich, poor, educated, illiterate, lawmakers, lawbreakers, straight, LGBTQ, male, female, in transition, he, she, they, and everything else, including those that cannot be classified. There are roughly 1,930 Asian Americans in Wayland, which represents about 14% of our population. Our numbers are growing and will continue to grow, largely due to our excellent school system, which the Asians will help to uphold. In Mass, as with Wayland, the indigenous white population has seen a steady decline. And the Commonwealth overall, however, has grown in population largely due to the growth in its Asian population, according to noted scholar and demographer Paul Watanabe. Nationally, the US Asian population has nearly doubled since 2000 to 2019. That's a staggering growth. Pew Research projects that by 2060, the US Asian population would quadruple and become the largest immigrant group at 46 million strong. I'm getting hungry to think about all the great restaurants that'll emerge by then. And it's probably a shame I won't be around to witness any of it or taste any of their food. So moving on, I think we have a great speaker in Margie Yamamoto, and her presentation is Justice Denied. It is the lived experience of a Japanese American family who was incarcerated during World War II. Margie was 2 years old when she was interned. Margie was 2 months old when she was interned. The thoughts and feelings that must have raced across their mother and father as they journeyed to the camps as they held the 2-month-old baby. Can you just say, I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like. After a long and distinguished career in marketing and communications for Walt Disney, GE, and a number of education and healthcare organizations in New York, California, and Massachusetts, Margie retired from her position as Director of Community Program Initiatives at WGBH. Today, she is co-president of the New England chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League, a national human rights and educational organization. Margie has been a presenter at the Massachusetts State House, MIT, Wellesley College, BC Law School, Brandeis University, Emerson College, Boston Public Library, and the Peabody Essex Museum, as well as so many other notable organizations and institutions throughout the area. She has received special accommodations from the Consulate General of Japan in Boston in recognition for her lifelong work in human rights. Most of all, however, Margie's New Year's Day parties are stuff of legend. And, and she bakes, hands down, the best chocolate chip cookies ever. So without further ado, please welcome Margie Yamamoto.
Thank you so much, Richard. I have a lot to live up to. And by the way, I want to borrow that screen behind you for the next time I have to give a talk. That's gorgeous back there. I'd like to thank Wayland's Racial Justice Advisory Committee for inviting me here today. And extra special thanks to Richard Lee for recommending me as a speaker. I'm really pleased and honored that he suggested I bring my talk to you. As he told you, I'm going to be talking about the experience of my family during World War II. And I'll be focusing mainly on my family, but you have to know, if you speak to any Japanese American today, you'll find that each will have his or her own unique story. Mine is just one of them. Let's get started. Now, I'm going to have to ask for your indulgence while I get my screen up. And here we go. Jordan, did I do it right?
Yes, we're up and we can see your presentation, Margie.
Okay, great. Thank you. There are few Japanese words I'm going to be using in my presentation, so I'll start with a very short lesson in Japanese. There are words in Japanese that describe the generations. They're used the same way we use the terms baby boomers and millennials. The first word is issei. Now that means first generation in America. This is the immigrant generation that was born in Japan. Next is nisei, the second generation. They are the children of the Issei and were born in America and are American citizens. There are more generations after that, sansei, yonsei, gosei, meaning third, fourth, and fifth generations. These words are based on the Japanese system of counting, ichi, ni, san, and so forth. So there are words to describe the generations no matter how far back your family goes. For today, we'll be concentrating on the Issei and Nisei. When my family was incarcerated during World War II, I was just an infant, so I really don't remember any of it. But I've learned a great deal about it through family stories, mostly told by my mother. We'll be seeing much of this story through her eyes. Let's get started by meeting her. This is Kinuko. Her name in Japanese means child of silk. Here she is at the age of 11. She was born in Hilo, Hawaii in 1904. She was a Nisei. This is her family. Only an older brother is missing from their picture. Her younger brother Yuke is standing between their parents, and you'll notice the two kids aren't smiling in this picture. That's because they just had an argument. You see, they shared one pair of shoes, and guess who got to wear them for the picture? Her parents came to Hawaii in 1897 from a small village in Japan near Hiroshima. They came over as contract laborers for one of the sugarcane plantations in Hawaii. They saved their money, and as soon as it was possible, they started their own business, a bakery, one that catered to the plantation workers. It was a family-run business, so all the kids were expected to help, Kinuko included. She was just 13 when her father died suddenly. And although she had two brothers, one of them older, it was she who was expected to quit school and work in the family bakery and take on babysitting duties for her younger cousins. That was her life until she turned 18. That's her with friends, the second from the left. Back in those days, 18 was the age of marriage, and someone had already approached her mother with a proposal for Kinuko. Her response was a loud and emphatic no. She told her mother she wanted to go back to school and learn something other than baking. She wanted to travel on big ships and see the world. Her mother just laughed because at that time, it was an outrageous wish for a mere girl. But Kinuko persisted, and her mother finally agreed to send her to sewing school. By this time, her brothers were helping in the bakery, so she was able to go on outings with her friends. That's her in the white hat sitting on the car's running board in the middle of a sugarcane field. Kinuko's mother waited patiently, but in a few years, she again brought up the subject of marriage. But Kinuko insisted she still wanted to travel on that big ship and see the world. Finally, her mother relented and decided to send her to Japan, where she hoped Kinuko would learn the language and some of the more refined aspects of being a proper Japanese woman. That's Kinuko on the left. The year was 1928, a time when things American were popular in Japan. She stayed with relatives in her parents' home village near Hiroshima. Once there, Kinuko found herself in great demand, teaching the Western style of sewing to women and English conversation to the young men. She embraced the Japanese lifestyle and began wearing kimonos and perfecting her Japanese. She told me she got a big kick out of being called sensei. Sensei is a title given professionals like teachers, doctors, and priests. And here she was, with just an 8th grade education, being called sensei by everyone. Unfortunately, all too soon, Kinuko's mother decided it was time for her to return home and get serious about finding a husband. So reluctantly, she returned to Hawaii. By now, she was 26 years old, an old maid by the standard of those days. Most of the men she knew in Hilo were too young, too old, or already married. Then an unexpected letter from California arrived that changed everything. Her cousin wrote telling her, "I found a husband for you." The young man was Sohei Yamamoto. He came to California in 1926 from a small fishing village in Japan. This was during the time of the Asian Exclusion Act that barred all Asians from immigrating to the United States. So Sohei sailed to Mexico, joined a group of migrant Mexican tomato pickers, and he walked into California. Yes, he was an early illegal alien. When he met Kinuko's cousin, he was managing a Japanese grocery store in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo. When the cousin offered to be the go-between for the couple, he was interested. The first step was an exchange of photos and letters, and soon Kinuko found herself again sailing on a big ship, this time to California. She arrived on October 17th, 1931, stayed with her cousin, and then a little more than 2 weeks later, they were married. They were able to gather the few friends and relatives they had in Los Angeles for a wedding celebration. Many years later, I asked her how she felt marrying a man she hardly knew. She told me, "I didn't want to worry my mother anymore. So I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and I got married." As they began planning for their future, the year was 1931, and the country was in the middle of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce and money very tight. They heard about a place called Terminal Island, where there was work and opportunities for Japanese people. In 1931, as you can see in this aerial photo, Southern California looked very different. That's Los Angeles. Directly to the south, you'll find Terminal Island. It's an actual island that's about 1 to 2 miles wide and nearly 14 miles long. It's located between San Pedro and Long Beach. Back then, there were no bridges to the island, only a ferry from San Pedro. The population was primarily Japanese and Japanese Americans who lived and worked there. The men of Terminal Island were fishermen. They fished for the tuna and mackerel that was so plentiful off the California coast. Their wives worked in the canneries, processing the fish they caught. In the days before large-scale refrigeration, the canneries operated on an as-needed basis, 24/7. When a fishing boat came in with its catch, they sounded a horn that could be heard across the island, and the women came immediately to begin processing the fish. It didn't matter if it was 2 or 3 in the morning. It wasn't a surprise that the canneries provided housing for their workers and their families, making Terminal Island truly a company town. At its height, Terminal Island had more than 3,000 residents. Kinuko and Sohei opened a grocery store on the island to serve the many families who lived and worked there. Sohei spoke little English, so from day one, Kinuko worked by his side, ordering supplies and handling everything that required English. When I asked her about their hours, she just laughed and said, "We worked all the time." Soon they welcomed their first child, my sister, Shinko Shirley, born in 1933. They added 2 boys, my brothers, Hajime James and Tadashi Teddy. The family quickly became part of the unique Terminal Island community. The island had restaurants, hotels, bars, stores, schools, doctors, everything needed to build a self-sufficient little town. In those early years, Sohei enjoyed taking my sister to community picnics. Many families also celebrated traditional Japanese holidays like New Year's Day, Boys' Day, and as you can see in this picture, Girls' Day. That's my sister on the left being held up by invisible hands. So both Kinuko and Sohei worked long hours in the store, and the boys were left in the care of their sister. Because it was such a closed community, it was safe for them to play anywhere, and there was usually an adult nearby. The family and the grocery store thrived. Sohei was able to expand the business to include a ship chandlery serving Japanese freighters and passenger ships. But then everything changed when on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the United States declared war on Japan. Terminal Island's location played an important role in what happened next. Let's take a look at a map. Here's Terminal Island. Los Angeles is directly to the north. An Army installation at Fort MacArthur was located in San Pedro to the west. And in 1941, a major naval station was being established in nearby Long Beach to the east. And poor Terminal Island was right in the middle. Within hours after the Pearl Harbor attack, the FBI descended on Terminal Island and began picking up community and religious leaders and many of the men who owned commercial fishing boats. Terminal Island's location and the men's access to boats made them suspected of helping the enemy. We were fortunate that my father was not among those arrested because he sold supplies to the Japanese ships before the war, but he had already been thoroughly investigated by the FBI and they didn't feel he posed a threat. The other Issei and Nisei men on Terminal Island were not as lucky. Once they were taken, their families didn't see them again for months and in some cases for years. Not a single one of these men was ever found to have committed an act of sabotage against the United States. Every home was searched by the FBI for contraband, and it was confiscated. That included things like cameras, flashlights, kitchen knives, even Boy Scout knives. There were stories of the FBI pouring out the family soy sauce, because it looked like liquid dynamite, and shredding sanitary napkins looking for hidden secret messages. As America entered the war, the national press quickly began carrying stories and photos to inflame anti-Japanese sentiments. Unfortunately, these negative sentiments often spilled over onto the Issei and the Nisei, with headlines like FBI detains Japs considered risks as enemy agents. Even the beloved Dr. Seuss became involved with editorial cartoons like this, showing Japanese on the West Coast lining up to be issued dynamite with which to commit acts of sabotage. On December 22nd, 1941, just 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Time magazine used an image of Japan's Admiral Yamamoto on its cover. He was the man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is his photo. And this is the caricature they used on the cover. Inside was an article telling you how to tell the difference between the Chinese and Japanese, using information obviously based on inaccurate stereotypes. Now, I've lived among Asian Americans almost my whole life, and I can't tell the difference. But Life magazine felt it knew and published stories with detailed descriptions. The faces they used in the article were of a Chinese public servant in the top photo and General Tojo, the Prime Minister of Japan, on the bottom. There was a detailed diagram of both faces, and the Chinese were described as being relatively tall and slender, with parchment yellow skin and a long and delicately boned face. The Japanese, on the other hand, were squat, had a massively boned head and face, flat nose, and yellow ochre skin. In a second set of pictures, we got a full body view of 3 tall, young, slender Chinese brothers, and I quote, 2 short, squat Japanese admirals. After these uncomplimentary photos and descriptions, you can't blame any Asian for not wanting to be mistaken for Japanese. But the public's anger and hatred was being directed at anyone who looked Asian. To protect themselves, some Chinese used homemade signs like this one, or they wore armbands and buttons stating, "I am Chinese." The Japanese countered with buttons and store signs like this one stating, "I am an American." By February 2nd, 1942, almost every remaining adult Japanese man on Terminal Island was taken into custody by the FBI. On February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that gave the military total jurisdiction over the Western Military Zone. He signed it over the objections of Attorney General Francis Biddle and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, both of whom felt the order was unconstitutional and unnecessary. With the presidential order putting the military in complete control of the Western Zone, Terminal Island became the first area in the United States to be affected. The more than 3,000 residents of Terminal Island were ordered to leave their homes and businesses and evacuate the island in just 48 hours. At that point, with few exceptions, the only people left on the island were women, teenagers, and children. Most of the men had already been arrested by the FBI. Despite the requirement of the presidential order that transportation, food, shelter, and accommodations be provided those removed from an area, no such provisions were made for their relocation. The only help came from family, friends, and churches. The fishermen's wives tried to sell their husbands' fishing boats. Eventually, they had to abandon them, and they had to abandon their houses. In our family, we were fortunate that my father wasn't taken by the FBI because my mother was 8.5 months pregnant with me, and they had 3 children under the age of 9. My parents' friends and relatives came with trucks and cars and helped to empty the store of what could not be sold. We moved to an apartment in Los Angeles. After we left, Terminal Island became a ghost town. And just 12 days after that forced evacuation, on March 11th, 1942, I was born. I was the first baby in my family born in a hospital. The others were delivered at home by a midwife. I was named Masumi Margaret after my grandmother and the child actress Margaret O'Brien. All the Japanese on the West Coast were watching what happened to us on Terminal Island because they knew they were next. About 1 month after we were forced to leave our home, the first of a series of mass evacuation orders were issued to the rest of the West Coast Japanese population. The poster on the right gave specific instructions to the Japanese. The plan was to move all persons of Japanese ancestry out of the Western military zone as soon as possible. This involved 120,000 people. On this map, you can see where the military established that zone, along the western states from Arizona all the way up the coast to Washington. Because it was impossible to build the more permanent camps quickly, the Japanese were first taken to 15 temporary detention centers, mostly in California, where they were confined at racetracks and state fairgrounds. In just 2.5 months, all 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry were removed from their homes in the Western military zone and placed in these temporary detention centers. They were taken from their homes and instructed to bring only what they could carry with them. 2/3 of them were American citizens. They were taken from orphanages and hospitals. They were taken if they were found to have even 1/16 Japanese blood. They were taken regardless of age, from the oldest to the very youngest. My family was sent to the Turlock Detention Center in Central California. This is the intake area where our bags are being searched. We were housed in hastily erected barracks like the one in the background. Some were not as lucky and were sent to racetracks like Santa Anita. There they were housed in horse stalls that were barely cleaned and whitewashed and still smelled of manure. We were held at these temporary detention centers for several months while the camps, permanent camps, were being built. These permanent incarceration camps, euphemistically called relocation centers, were scattered across the states. There were 10 camps located in California, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, Wyoming, and as far east as Arkansas. The irony of it was that there were Japanese already living in some of these states, and they were not incarcerated. From the temporary center in Central California, we were taken by train to a permanent camp in Arizona. It was July, and the train was not air-conditioned. The shades were pulled down so no one could see us, and my poor mother had to contend with 3 restless children and me, a 4-month-old diapered baby. We arrived at Gila River, Arizona on July 28, 1942. The camp was located 50 miles southeast of Phoenix and 87 miles northwest of Tucson, in the middle of nowhere. The government leased 17,000 acres of Pima Indian Reservation land and built the camp on 1,000 acres. At its peak occupancy, Gila River housed 13,348 people, making it the 4th largest city in the state of Arizona. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire fencing with a strategically placed armed guard tower. We were told this would be our home for the duration. The area is often considered the hottest in the United States, with temperatures as high as 115 degrees. Families were housed in black tar paper covered barracks. A barrack was 20 feet wide by 100 feet long. For larger families like ours, it was divided into 4 living units. So our family of 6 lived in a space 20 by 25 feet in size. What everyone remembers were the ever-present sandstorms, as you can see in this sketch by Nisei artist Mineo Kubo. These hastily constructed barracks were made with green lumber that shrank in the hot Arizona sun. The sand invaded the barracks through gaps between the lumber, and my mother had to put layers of wet cheesecloth over my crib to protect me. The units were empty, except for army cots. We were given mattress pads to fill with straw for our beds. Here's a typical unit. Any furniture you see was made with scrap lumber. The partition between each family's living unit was open at the top, which meant absolutely no privacy for anyone. That lack of privacy even extended to the showers and the toilets. These facilities were built military style, with separate latrines and showers for men and women. In the showers, the more modest women would wear bathing suits. Here's another sketch by Minio Kubo showing the partitions that were eventually built between the toilets and the women's area, but only after the churches intervened. They did not allow any doors, so the women had to improvise their own. There were so many people that there were lines for everything, from mess hall lines to lines for the latrine and showers or to do your laundry. You might stand in some lines for hours. Because the Japanese had a wide range of professions, some were offered jobs in the camps. No one was allowed to earn more than the average GI, so doctors, teachers, and other professionals earned $19 a month. $16 a month was paid for skilled labor like camp cooks, and $12 a month for unskilled labor like mess hall helpers. Getting fresh vegetables was not a problem at Gila River, where we had a very successful agricultural operation. We reactivated the irrigation canals that had been developed by the indigenous Indians many centuries earlier and turned the area into rich farmland. We grew more than 40 Western and Asian vegetable crops and supplied all of the camp's vegetable needs. Life was beginning to turn routine in the camp until February of 1943, when the authorities finally decided to ask about the loyalty of the people they had imprisoned. All persons 17 years of age and older were asked to complete the loyalty questionnaire. It consisted of 28 questions. The last two caused confusion and anger in the camps. Question 27 asked, "Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States in combat duty wherever ordered?" Those of draft age wondered if a yes answer automatically meant they were enlisting. There were many willing to fight, but some demanded that their families be freed from the camps before they would volunteer. And they would refuse the draft. Women and the elderly Issei who could not fight wondered what would happen to them if they answered no. The younger Issei, who still had family in Japan, worried they might find themselves having to fight against brothers and cousins. Question 28 asked, in part, "Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and forswear any form of allegiance to the Emperor of Japan or any other foreign government, power, or organization?" For the Issei, who were barred from American citizenship by US law, if they answered yes, they would become people without a country. The Nisei felt insulted they would be asked to forswear allegiance to an emperor in a country they never even visited. At the same time, the Nisei feared if they answered yes, yes to the two questions, and their parents no, no, they would be separated. They were right. Those families and individuals who answered no, no were considered troublemakers and sent to a segregated camp on the Oregon-California border, where they were given harsher treatment. Some who refused military service were sent to prison. The loyalty questionnaire came as the government began efforts to form a segregated all-Nisei military combat team. Originally, all Nisei were classified 4C, or enemy aliens, and non-draftable, even though they were all American citizens. Eventually, the military reversed its stand and began actively recruiting the Nisei. Some were assigned to the Pacific Theater with the Military Intelligence Service as translators, interrogating captured Japanese prisoners of war. Others were sent to Europe as members of the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team, where their incredible bravery was honored with 21 medals of honor, the highest military honor possible. With a casualty rate of 314%, the men of the 442nd received more than 18,000 individual decorations. By the war's end, the all-Nisei 442nd became the most highly decorated combat unit of its size in U.S. military history and are shown here being honored by President Harry Truman. While these Nisei were fighting in Europe and the Pacific, many of their families were still being held behind barbed wire in their own country. Back at Gila River, the loyalty questionnaire was administered to my parents. Ever the pragmatists, they answered yes, yes, anything that might give us an opportunity to leave the camp. By 1944, the government began to allow families and individuals to leave if they stayed outside the Western military zone and had a job and a place to live. My uncle in Denver had his own business and agreed to be our sponsor. This picture was taken just before we left Gila River on April 21st, 1944, and it's the only picture I have of me as a baby. Since our cameras were confiscated right after the war broke out, we have very few pictures from this period. When we left the camp, we were given a one-way bus ticket to Denver and $25 per person. Our trip to Denver resulted in our exposure to what some Japanese Americans were already experiencing outside of the camps. We weren't greeted by this sign, but it was an indication of what we might expect. On the trip to Denver, my mother and 3 of the kids used the bus tickets, but my father and my oldest brother drove with our uncle and all our baggage from Gila River to Denver. On the way, they stopped in a small town diner for lunch. Before they were finished, they suddenly realized word had gotten out about their presence, and a crowd was forming at the entrance. They had to be escorted out the back door for their safety. When we all arrived in Denver, we felt relatively safe being among family and friends. But one day I went to the post office with my mother. I must have been about 2 or 3 years old. And we were waiting in line to buy stamps when suddenly a woman saw us and began pointing and chanting over and over, 2 for penny Japs, 2 for penny Japs. We left quickly without our stamps. Soon after, my parents decided to leave Denver, and we were on the road again, this time to Chicago, where many Japanese from the camps were settling. We opened a restaurant and called it the Gila River Inn, so anyone coming out of the camps could find us. After the war ended in 1945, we packed up and left Chicago, made a quick stop in Denver, and moved back to Southern California. Dad joined his brother, who had moved the business from Denver, and Mom went to work in a sewing factory. By this time, Dad was in his mid-40s, but ever the entrepreneur, he and Mom saved their money and soon opened another grocery store, Aloha Market in Gardena, California. You can guess who named the store. When Japanese ships began to trade in the port of Los Angeles again, Dad restarted the ship chandlery and moved the store to San Pedro. This time they called it Yamamoto Brothers, hoping their 2 sons would eventually take it over. As the business grew, they moved to a warehouse in Wilmington, just across the water from Terminal Island. Eventually, it looked like this. It was operated by my oldest brother, Jimmy, until he retired in 2012. My other brother, Teddy, went on to become a lawyer. My sister, Shirley, was widowed early and worked with Jimmy in the family business. As the business grew, Mom and Dad were able to travel, and in 1972, they went back to the small village in Japan where Dad was born. It was the first time he'd been back since 1926. In all those years after the war, my parents never spoke ill of their camp experience. When Dad was 75, I gave him a Japanese translation of America's concentration camps. Now, it's not the best book about our experience, but it was the only one I could find that was translated into Japanese. This was the first time he had seen anything like this in print in a language he could read easily. He had spent more than 33 years feeling the guilt and shame of our imprisonment and never saw anything that told him it was unjust. After he read the book, he asked me to please get him more books in Japanese like that one. He was ill with cancer at the time and passed away the next year, and I was never able to find him more books. 12 years after Dad's death, the United States government passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, granting reparations to Japanese who had been incarcerated during World War II. Watching President Reagan sign the act are Norman Mineta and Bob Matsui. Both are Japanese American men who had been incarcerated as children and went on to become U.S. congressmen. The hard work to get the act passed took more than 18 years and was led by the Nisei and Sansei generations of Japanese Americans. They enlisted the support of like-minded senators and representatives to pass this legislation that resulted in payment of $20,000 to each person who had been incarcerated and was still alive. With the check came an official letter of apology from the sitting president. This is a letter I received. It's signed by George Bush Sr. The government began by paying the oldest Japanese first because so many of the Issei and Nisei were dying. I was visiting my mother a few months after she was paid, and I asked what she did with the money. Now, in my mother's house, she had a Buddhist altar in the living room where she put pictures of deceased relatives. Whenever we had a family celebration or dinner, she always put some of the food there so they could share in the festivities. She took me to this altar, and there, resting against Dad's picture, was her uncashed check. She just wanted to be sure he knew. On her 88th birthday, our whole family gathered to celebrate, including her younger brother, Yuke, who was 86 and flew over from Hawaii to join us. As you can see, this time they both got to wear their own shoes. Her 4 kids were on hand too. That's Jimmy on the left, the oldest brother who took over the family business. Teddy, the lawyer, is next to him. That's me when my hair was still all black. And finally, my sister Shirley. My mother died the year after the picture was taken. She was 89. Although my parents are no longer with us, their story continues because they've left us with a large, multiracial, multicultural family that includes 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 21 great-grandchildren, and 6 great-great-grandchildren. That's Mom there in the middle. Our story is just one of the many thousands to result from our World War II incarceration. What happened to us is almost 80 years in the past, but the lessons we need to learn about racism and hate are as fresh as today's headlines. I'd like to close with the words of the late Congressman John Lewis. When he talked about building a movement for change, which is what we need, he challenged us and made us look to the future. John Lewis said, "Ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe many lifetimes, and each one of us in every generation must do our part." Thank you.
So Margie, that was excellent. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
So I think what we'll do next, we'll do about 5 to 10 minutes of question and answer. So do we on your screens, do you have the option of using the raise hand feature? Is that on there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so what we'll do is if anyone would like to ask a question, I'd ask that you please raise your hand using the Zoom feature, and I'll do my best to getting around to anybody that might have something that they'd like to ask Margie. Okay.
How about we go with Janelle?
Yeah, Janelle, if you would like to unmute yourself, you'll have the floor.
Thank you, Margie Sensei. I understand that you had a period in your life where some of your work could be characterized as activist in the 60s or the 70s. I'd like to ask you how your family background influenced or motivated you, and how you participated in the struggle in that time in American history.
That's interesting because growing up, I grew up mostly public schools in California, but I never learned anything about the camp experience, and my parents didn't speak too much about it. But when I was in graduate school, I took an Asian American history class and suddenly, in a way, awakened to what was happening and found out about the injustice of the whole situation. And after I graduated, I went to work for a Japanese American human rights organization in San Francisco. That was my first job out of graduate school, and helped organize and lead pilgrimages to the campsites and things like that. And that got me involved. And then later I realized I had to make some money, so I had to get a job that paid real money. And so I went into the marketing communications field and what my degree was in, and got real jobs, so to speak. But during that whole time, I continued to be a member of the organization because it is the Japanese American Citizens League, and it's a national organization with chapters all over the United States. So I would always do my volunteer work there. But you know, I feel embarrassed to say, growing up and everything, I knew nothing about all this. And it was a sudden awakening. And I don't know if I'm answering the question, how I learned about it. And then I started talking to my mother. And because I didn't speak Japanese that well, I couldn't talk to my father. I don't know, children of immigrants like this have that same problem of communicating in deep subjects. I mean, I could say I'm hungry and I want to eat this, but talk about this sort of thing and how did you feel? I couldn't. And that's the pity of it, because he died before we could really talk about it more. And I could have used my mother as a translator if I had the interest at that point and wanted to. But and I think this all led to my interest in my family's history and everything else going back to Japan. You know, we have all sorts of history that I can pull on now. And so it was more just trying to find out more about where I came from.
So I see we have Tony, and then we can have Ann ask her question. So Tony, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Margie. Very interesting. 4 years ago, we took our grandsons car camping out west and visited the Heart Mountain internment camp in Wyoming. And was surprised to see that it was totally funded by private donations. The United States really not interested in keeping these camps alive. What is the status on that? I noticed you mentioned there are 10 camps Heart Mountain being one of them.
Mhm.
Are any of the others open for visiting? And what is the status of the United States in supporting the ongoing camps and having them available for people to learn from our history?
Many of those camps are now run, they have education centers run by Park Services, US Park Services. So there is funding from the government to do this. I'm not sure if that was part of that reparations deal in when they paid the Japanese reparations, because I know there was an insistence that a lot of money go into education. And apparently every year it doesn't happen every year, it depends on how the budget goes, but some money is put aside for continuing education because our organizations can apply for grants from that fund to do local programs and other events, or some of it goes towards funding films that people are making, things like that. But I wish I had a number for you, but I know Heart Mountain has one of the better education centers, and they usually have a Park Service person there attached to it to help keep it going. And then there's lots of volunteer efforts by the people who were in that camp to raise money and help support it in other ways. The Tule Lake camp that's on the border of Oregon and California, that's the one that all the quote troublemakers were sent to. And it was really a terrible place. They've turned that into one of those Park Services sites. And last time I checked, one of the park ranger who's there is a Japanese American, and her aunt was somebody I went to high school with. So, I mean, it was just really great to see that. I think the Arkansas, believe it or not, one of the Arkansas camps has a education center. The one I was in does not. But I think Poston, there are two in Arizona, Gila River and Poston. I think the Poston one might have something. I'm not as up on all of that because it would be fun to just go visit them myself and see them. I've only been to the Arizona Gila River one that our family was in. And I had to get special permission from the Indians, Native Americans there, because it was still on their property, their reservation property. And I had to write the council and ask for permission. And they let Japanese Americans who lived in that camp come, but you do have to get the permission. I don't think there's anything stopping anyone who's driving by from stopping there, but I just figured I wanted to do it the right way. So we got the permission. Yes, the government is still funding it through the Park Services. So there are sites, and you just have to look up each one and it'll tell you, what the hours are or what they have there.
Yeah.
But thank you for asking that. But because some of the pictures I got were from one of the campsites, because I couldn't take a picture of the toilets because they were all gone. Mm-hmm. And they've reconstructed parts of the camp at some of the sites. So that was a picture that someone took for me from one of the campsites.
Okay. Anne, you have the floor.
Okay. So it's sad for me to say that as an American history major in college, I never knew about this either. But I have learned about it as an adult, recently. So I'm 74 now, so you can guess when I graduated from college. So maybe things have changed, maybe not. But what I wanted to kind of bring up and see if you would agree, as I was doing some research on this when I first learned about it, there was also seemingly a lot of evidence of the fear and the racism, especially in California. But also what came up was a lot of jealousy, apparently, about how the Japanese, who have a great skill in creating gardens, as we saw in the desert there and things like that, were kind of the objects of envy from a lot of people. And so when the government decided to play this racist card, which was unfounded, and they were moved out, there was no protection left for them. Their homes that they owned legitimately, their belongings in their home, their farms, their gardens, their businesses. Nothing was set up by the government to say, okay, we're taking these people now and we'll see what happens, but hands off. Is that correct? Is that really, did many of the Japanese successful business people, especially, and just other ordinary people, also lose their homes forever and their gardens and their, businesses, etc.?
Correct. Let's start with before the war broke out, and the Japanese immigrants were coming here. First of all, the Issei, the first generation, were not allowed to buy land or anything. So they would either lease or buy land in the name of their children who were American citizens. And the only land they could get was the land that nobody else wanted and couldn't be cultivated, according to the American farmers. They came in, cleared the land of whatever was the problem, and had fantastic
results.
Yeah, fantastic results. There was a great deal of jealousy because all these terrible yellow people were taking over and earning a lot of money. In California, Earl Warren was a governor. And as you know, when he was a justice, he was the great liberal. That's why it was a surprise. But there was a lot of political pressure. The newspapers were against all the Japanese immigrants who were here. It was led by the McClatchy newspaper chain. And there was a lot of pressure political pressure on the governor to do whatever he could do to make this happen. As far as losses, I would read about farmers who were on the verge of a great crop, and then suddenly they were removed, and the crop just lay in the land and rotted because nobody to take it, harvest it, or do anything. And after the war, and then unless they had someone who they trusted to take care of the property and pay the taxes and do all the things that needed to be done, they would lose their property because no one would pay the taxes during that time. Some people had people they trusted. My cousin had one, and they had large properties in Southern California, and they came out very, very well because the person they trusted took care of it all for them. Others lost a lot. I think it was in the 1950s, there was a point when the government said, we will reimburse you for your losses during the war. But in order to fill out the papers, you had to have receipts from all the things that you lost. My father looked at that and he just said, forget it. I mean, we just had what we could carry with us, so we didn't have receipts from everything. There were others with great property loss who fought it in the courts and eventually got something out of it, but it was at such a small portion of what they really lost because it was in the 1942 value of the dollar,
Right.
not 1950 whatever when they were offering that. So yeah, some people got some of their money back, others got nothing. So people did lose their homes if the taxes weren't paid or if it wasn't maintained in some way. Others were fortunate.
I can't even imagine the emotional toil and
yeah.
how much it would have cost them, to their well-being to try to fight for what was truly theirs. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Wonderful
question.
wonderful, Margie. Thank you.
And we'll do one more question. I see Laurel, you have your hand up.
Thank you so much for sharing your family's story. You mentioned that you shared the book with your father because it was the one that was translated into Japanese, but it wasn't necessarily your preference. Is there a book that you would recommend for us to read more?
Well, You know, there's an old standard that's probably one of the oldest ones we have. It's called, I think, Farewell to Manzanar, or I'm sorry, I don't have my book list here with me, and my memory's not that great. But I think it was about Manzanar, and it's. I was just looking around to see if I could read my bookcase, but I can't find it. Anyway, I do have a book list that I can send to anyone. If I can get their email address, I'll gladly send you a book list of books that I think are good, and cover it both from the legal standpoint as well as out as a novel, in both ways. They're both important. And the Manzanar book was based on her life and what happened to her family, but it reads more like a novel. So it's, you know, it would hold people's interest. There are other books that are more about the uncovering of papers that brought to light the illegality of what happened, and so on and so forth, that are very good books too, but a little bit more, I guess, meant for the classroom.
All right, thank you.
By the way, I love your hair.
Oh, thank you.
Margie, what I'm thinking, if you have a list of books that you might recommend to anybody that would be interested, I think we have the email addresses of everybody that attended today. If you could send that list along, and I can forward it to all of our participants today.
No problem. I'll send it to you.
Okay. Great. Tony, can real quick?
Yeah, I was wondering if I noticed this is being recorded. I'd love to send it to my grandsons who went to Heart Mountain. So can you get that notice out as to how we get that?
The recording of this meeting?
Yeah.
Of this event? Yeah, I think with the last event, we posted it on our website. So when we have the recording up and posted, you'll be able to go on to Wayland's home website, and it'll be under, I believe, the town administrator. Tony, I will look for your information, and I'll follow up with you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So moving along to our next guest speaker tonight, Richard, would you please introduce Terry Livingston from the Lived Wayland Experiences Project?
Sure, I'd be happy to, except Terry, can you hold on just a second? I think this would be a better segue. I have one final question for Margie. Margie, in having lived through both experiences, do you see any similarities between the messaging of what just happened with the COVID versus what you went through and some of the things that the Japanese community went through, do you think?
Well, every time there is a group targeted by someone for hate crimes, when something happens, there's always a similarity. I mean, World War II was a big thing, and we were targeted. Think about what happened at 9/11. Arab Americans, people who wore a turban, they were targeted here in America with hate crimes. Every time, you know, yes, and now COVID, and a president who unfortunately targeted Chinese people too. Now we have permission to have acts of hatred against Asian Americans. Yeah, definitely see a lot of similarities between all of these things. Anytime there is something that attacks us, we feel especially in our own communities, they are targeting someone. And we are so obvious because we look different. It's easier to target us than, say, an Italian or a German during World War II, although they did target Italians and Germans to a lesser degree than they did the Japanese. But oh, definitely, I don't know if I answered it.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much. Okay, so Terry, sorry about that. Terry Livingston, we have the great honor of having her here with us, obtained a doctorate of pharmacy from the UC San Francisco system. She has over 20 years of pharmaceutical experience and 12 years of clinical research experience. As a business leader and a researcher, she has studied racial disparities and social determinants of health in various settings to champion diversity and inclusion, address healthcare disparities, and advocate for underserved populations. Currently, Terry is the head of Patient Outcomes Solutions team in North America Medical Affairs at EMD Serono. She and her family have lived in Wayland for over 10 years. She has 2 boys who attended the Wayland schools. And I had the pleasure of getting to know Terry through her work with the Human Rights Study Group, where she was just instrumental in launching and collecting the important Wayland Living Experience project. Dr. Livingston, I presume. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Please welcome Terry Livingston.
Thank you, Richard. I get that often, so I've been waiting for somebody to do that. Well, I want to just thank the group for the invitation to speak today. I found, and thank you, Margie, for sharing your family history. It really hit home with me because, as you know, I shared with you, I was born and raised in Hawaii. And so what you shared, I often heard from my mom and my dad and my family friends. I remember my mom sharing how she remembered seeing the planes, the Japanese planes coming in, right? Because she lived in Hawaii. They lived in Hawaii, and she actually saw the planes coming in as they approached the island of Oahu, and before they bombed Pearl Harbor. And just I think I think it's interesting hearing people say that they only of late have learned about this history, when I think maybe growing up in Hawaii, I heard it all the time. I saw it, I lived it. And so just thank you for sharing that, your story. And so what I wanted to do was actually to bring it a little closer to home and to share with you what's happening here in our town of Wayland, as well as to share my lived experience of being an Asian American woman raising a family here in this town. So what I thought I'd do, and Jordan, am I going to be able to share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Can we see it? Can you see the? Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. So what I thought I would first do was to be able to share the interim result of the Wayland Lived Experiences project. So this was an effort that is an initiative that was born from a group of concerned Wayland residents who met weekly throughout 2020 to examine and study the potential need for a human rights committee here in the town of Wayland. The Lived Experiences Project is a story collecting initiative to gather experiences of any form of identity-based mistreatment through an anonymous survey of people who live, work, study, worship, or visit Wayland. Through these experiences, the group hoped to amplify the collective voices through periodic reports, presentations, and discussions such as these to raise awareness, inspire dialogue, and to create change in the hopes of making Wayland an inclusive, equitable, and welcoming community. For those of you who may not know or have not seen the survey, it is an anonymous survey. It was actually adapted with permission from the Needham's Lived Experiences survey. The survey, the questions that are contained in the survey are listed here. And the Lived Experiences Project asks people to describe the incident or experience that happened to them, to be able to provide responses and how it made them feel, what actions they took, if there were any other people involved, and how and what they would like to see different happen within Wayland, as well as some of the demographic questions of the individual respondents. Oops, sorry, I gotta plug in my computer. Sorry. Oh no.
Terry, are you still with us?
No.
There she is.
It looks like we may have lost her. Let's just give her a couple of minutes and see if she can log back on. In the meantime, Margie, would you mind if we see if anyone else from the group would have any questions for you, and see if Terry can log back on?
Sure. Actually, I have a story I want to tell Tony about Heart Mountain.
Oh.
Because Heart Mountain, that's Wyoming, right? So, you know who Alan Simpson is?
Yes, I do.
He was senator from
Wyoming.
for many years, I guess. Well, he was a teenage Boy Scout, or a 12-year-old Boy Scout about the time the war broke out. And Norman Mineta, who I mentioned as one of the congressmen who was in camp, he was in the camp as a Boy Scout. And while they were trying to organize the kids, they allowed the Boy Scouts to meet, and they were trying to get Boy Scout baseball games going. And nobody on the outside would come to play with them. But finally, they got this Boy Scout troop that Alan Simpson was in to come and play with the Japanese kids. Well, that began a friendship between Norman and Alan Simpson, which got renewed when both were in Congress at the same time. Alan was a senator and Norm came in as a congressman. And they've kept that friendship ever since. And they often come to the Heart Mountain annual pilgrimage, the two of them, and they'll talk about that whole experience. And it's just such a wonderful story and such a funny story, especially if you know Al Simpson. He's got to be about 6'4" or something. He's very tall, and Norm is closer to my height. And you just imagine as good friends.
We lived in California, and Norman Mineta was our congressman down in San Jose in the Palo Alto area. So he's a wonderful person. I had heard that story before. It's a great human interest story. Yeah, they're great people. Thank you.
I saw Terry back.
Yeah.
So we've got Terry back.
I'm back. Sorry. It would help, right, if I plugged in my computer. I apologize.
No worries. So if you want to pick up where you left off.
Okay, am I back up?
Yes.
You're back up.
Okay, so these were the questions. So at a high level, what I wanted to do was to be able to share some of the early findings. We launched the survey on December 10th, 2020. And so to date, we have 25 experiences that have been shared through the survey. So here's just some of the basic information, right? 18 individuals provided the experience on behalf of themselves. 7 on behalf of someone else. With the exception of one, the experiences happened within the 2000s, some, in the mid 2000s, and then 12 in the kind of the last 2 years from 2018 to 2020. From an age range standpoint, you see a broad range from 27 to 74 years, primarily female. And you see we have experiences of people that lived in Wayland, worked in Wayland, as well as went to school in Wayland. And as you may all be aware, Wayland is a very highly educated town. And so the majority of those that provided their experience had postgraduate degrees. So this is a breakdown of by race and ethnicity of the individuals that experienced, right, the mistreatment. So as you can see here, Asian, 32% of the mistreatments were seen by Asians. And then I provided a breakdown, right? South Asian was 30 of the Asians, right? 34% were South Asian, meaning Indian, East Asian, 63%, and then Southeast Asian at 12.5%. And then followed by 24% of those that received the mistreatment of being Black, and then followed by white at 16%. And then you see kind of at 4% each, right? You have Caribbean, Portuguese, Hispanic. And this is self-identified. This individual self-identified as being Jewish, and then 12% being provided no response. So what we did was that we then compared it to the population of Wayland. So on the left-hand side, based on the demographic information from 2019, you can see kind of the comparison of the Wayland population compared to the individuals in our lived experiences project. And you see disproportionately that Asians are affected, right, as well as African Americans or Blacks at where they 24% of them, right, receive the mistreatment, but only make up 2% of the Wayland population. So we then we asked it, and here the result of who mistreated you. So if what you can see is the residents, right, at 30%, followed by school students, school authority at 17%, and then public and town officials at 15%. I think what's of interest to note is that when you look collectively across the residents, school students, and neighbors, they make up 52% of the incidents, and they're being done by our Wayland residents. The type of mistreatment is presented here, with the majority of the mistreatments being verbal, mistreatments or microaggressions at 8 apiece. Some of the examples under here, like verbal, right, include name calling, demeaning languages, use of condescending tone. There were quotes of why don't you go back, or why don't you go back to Polynesia, or go back home. Nonverbal were dirty looks, being watched closely in a public place, and rolling of eyes. Microaggressions included stereotypes. There was one story of an individual, a Black man was speaking to an older white man, and asked whether what school he was going to, and he said Harvard, and the white man said, well, what sport do you play? Again, with the kind of implication that he got accepted to Harvard because of sports and not based on his merit. So those are some of the examples that were shared. I'll just leave you, here are some kind of quotes from some of the examples of mistreatment that were shared with us, that we were allowed to be able to, that they agreed, right, to be able to present publicly. So I'll just kind of let you read them for yourself. I think the one that really hits home and really is hard to read is this one. This white affluent father went on to blame his son's poor progress on the guest in the classroom. Confused, the person asked who he was talking about, and he responded, "The black kids you bus in." For me, right, those are some things that really hit home hard because of my two sons, and because these things have actually happened to me and my family. The reasons, so with that, the reasons for discrimination, as you can imagine, are based on race and ethnicity, followed by gender, sexual orientation, religion, and disability. What we then also did was we put these word clouds together based on some of the questions we asked to kind of pull out key themes and key words. This question was about how the mistreatment or the experience made you feel, and you can see a myriad of emotions and feelings, from being angry and sad to frustrated, humiliated, and unwelcome. We also asked whether any action was taken after the incident happened. And what comes through is that no action was taken. Some people did go to other people of authority, such as the principal, to their teachers, to their parents. But by and large, most people took no action. And we did ask about, if you didn't take action, why? What was the reason? And you see what strongly comes through is the word retribution, and it was used repeatedly. And if you look at the phrases, some of the other phrases, they like quietly get back at you, afraid to talk back, adversely affected. These all kind of fall in line with retribution. So at a high level, those are some of the results that we have seen to date. We do hope to be able to continue to collect these experiences. The survey is still available. It is accessible through this link here. We do have paper versions of the survey, and they're available in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. If you have any feedback or questions, we'd love to be able to hear from you. We do have an email account at waylandlivedexperiences@gmail.com. So that's kind of, again, broadly what is happening within our community. We hope that, again, with the formation of the Human Rights DEI Committee, that this committee will want to be able to continue these efforts going forward, so that we can at least inform and be able to understand and to listen on what some of these experiences and issues are happening within our town. What I wanted to do was to kind of switch gears. Our Wayland group asked if I would be willing to share my lived experience as an Asian American woman raising a family. And so I agreed to do so. I'm going to stop sharing. So I think just to kind of follow along with some of what Margie had shared in her family history, Mine is more relevant to today and to, again, my experiences here in Wayland. And I just like to share, just like Margie did, that this is my personal lived experience. Others will certainly have a different perspective and have different experiences. So know that this is just what I've experienced while living here in our town. And just to start and to give a background of who I am. So I was born and raised in Hawaii, as I mentioned up front. Fourth generation on my mom's side, fifth generation on my dad's side. Living in Hawaii, it is one of the most diverse states in the US, where actually that people of color are the majority, and Asians actually make up the largest racial group. So growing up, and throughout my life, I have been called many names. I have been asked if I'm Bruce Lee's sister, given a hard time about my slanted eyes and yellow skin, the proverbial kung fu jokes, and asking if my parents owned a laundromat. We were, told and taught to dismiss these things, to put our heads down, to let it roll off our backs, to get an education, and to just work hard. It was the price of admission. So that's what I did. I got my education, got my PhD, got married, had 2 sons, and have a great career. And yet, at times, it's still not enough. As an Asian American, we're often seen as the other or in the middle, and at times even invisible. This became more evident for me and my family when we moved to Massachusetts over 10 years ago. Like many families, we chose Wayland because of the schools. But being an outside or the other, or still not being enough, took on different forms here within the town. In our first year of moving here to Wayland, my youngest, who was 6 at the time, was involved in a racial incident by other neighborhood kids. He had received a package addressed to him during a doorbell ditch prank. Didn't even know what doorbell ditch was until I moved here to Massachusetts. To my surprise, on the package, I found words directed at my 6-year-old, calling him stupid, ugly, that they didn't like him. And the phrase is, from here to China and go back home, from 7-year-olds. The assumptions have been made of my son while in school that he was part of the Metco program and lived in Boston because people of color don't live in Wayland. To being profiled and followed in some of our businesses in our town to make sure that we weren't stealing anything. And I think the most recent incident that has been the most difficult was because I know it was motivated by hate. And this happened the same week. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. I'm still processing this, but this happened the same week of the Atlanta killings of the 6 Asian women. I was walking in our town center, our town center plaza, when a white man in a dark Ford pickup truck drove by and yelled, "Yellow skin, go home," and then spit at me as he drove by. And especially, I like I said, I've been called names before, but I think it was the act of spitting, especially in this time of COVID, that just took it to a different level. I've had a mix of emotions from being afraid and fearful at that, within the moment, to being angry and mad, to being grateful because I'm alive and I wasn't physically hurt, to feeling ashamed and helpless. And while none of my lived experiences were egregious, I describe them as like a paper cut. At the time, they hurt like heck, but are minor. However, if you get a repeated paper cut, especially in the same place, it begins to harden and to form a scar. So I wanted to share my lived experience to raise awareness, to try to prevent other paper cuts from happening, to be able to help someone who may be going through similar experiences, and for others to just raise awareness of what it's like to be a person of color living in our town. I'm using my lived experience to speak up and no longer put my head down and dismiss it. I believe Wayland is a good community with good schools and good people. I strongly believe if we collectively can come together and listen to one another, to look inward and challenge ourselves to think differently, we have the power to create change in our town and to make Wayland a welcoming and inclusive community. Thank you for listening to my lived experience. I appreciate and am humbled by the opportunity.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for being so brave and for sharing your experience with us. I just wanted to quickly ask you and Margie. You guys mentioned that it's a lifetime of paper cuts. Do you ever feel that you get used to this? Is it something that you become acclimated to, or just can you brush this off?
I mean, I could speak. We try, but it's hard. I think even through kind of my recent incident that just happened, I think it's a process and it takes time for things to heal. I know that I still find myself as I'm driving, still clenching to the steering wheel as a Ford pickup truck drives by. So it's not easy. We try, but it's not easy. Takes time.
Terry, God, thank you for your story. I just feel for you so much. I do say it gets better. I can say that from the standpoint of being 79 years old. I'm almost 80. And when you get older, you don't care so much about what other people say to you, because you'll tell them right back what you think. And I don't want to say it gets easier, because it does still hurt. It feels awful. Mm-hmm. And I always think in the moment, I didn't think of the proper thing I should have said. And I just sort of worry about that I wish I would have, lashing back at somebody who does something like that isn't going to help. But, that's why I give these talks, because it helps me to let people know what's really happening. And that's why your study is so important. And you speaking up like this is really wonderful. And thank you very, very much, Terry.
Thanks, Margie.
Thank you, Terry. Very courageous. No way that I can know, but my heart is with you. It's really hard. I just wish we could come together.
Yeah, and thank you, Terry, thank you for sharing both the survey that you and the lived experiences group put together, and also thank you for sharing your personal story. It takes a lot of courage to get in front of essentially a town and share something that's so personal, based off of not just one unfortunate incident, but really it seems like almost what you described is like a series of paper cuts. So thank you very much for having the courage to come and share that with everyone. So I think what we'll do next is similar to before. If you feel comfortable taking some questions, Terry, we can do about 5 or 10 minutes. If anybody would like to ask a question, if you could do the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many people as we can. Janelle, I saw your hand come up first.
Thank you so much, Terry. I sincerely hope that that you do feel that there is support in the community, even people who don't know you. But what I'd like to ask you is, following this most recent incident in the context of the uptick in violence nationally, how did you feel about where you could go with this? How could you seek to find your security here in the town of Wayland, in the community of Wayland? And what do you think was missing? What do you think needs to be done or could be done so that you could find that sense of security again?
Sure. Thanks, Janelle, for the question. So I know one of the first questions people ask is, did I report it to the police? And I didn't. That's another thing that, in my family, we were told not to take things to the police. So I didn't. I turned to my family like I normally do, and to a friend who actually was kind enough to be able to stay with me I was alone at the time when it happened, and she stayed with me on the phone until my family got home and was able to, again, I was able to be in the comfort of my family. Also, the Human Rights Study Group that I have worked with, they were very supportive. So I do think that, and I think with all of you've showed up today and are interested. So I think those are the first steps. I do know that there is the Board of Selectmen have recently approved the development of the Human Rights DEI group committee. So I'm hopeful there. I think, and for me, while there wasn't that group, that the HRC study group was kind of my outlet and my group that I could turn to. And so I do see the value of a similar committee within our town to be able to go to be able to potentially get resources and to do that. I like just do that outreach and to have a place that that you can go within the town, a safe place, right? I think that's important. It's a safe place. And that you won't be judged, and that you can again go to get resources and to get help.
Great. Next,
Hopefully that helped and answered.
Great. Next, I see Yawu. Yawu, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm very sorry to hear that you hear this kind of problem at the Wayland. It's to me, it's very surprise. I'm here for 50 years, always. The only time I run into something like that was in Chinatown years ago. but I just treat that guy like crazy guy. So I say so, you run this for 40 years. As happened once, I treated as like he was a crazy guy. So but now seems it's still a little bit different because the incidence is getting more, and partially because the political environment. So I'm glad that the town Wayland is addressing this issue and started facing this kind of issue early in the games. So I'm also interested to learn that we do have this kind of a survey on experience living in the Wayland. I wonder if that is only for those few 30 or some samples, or just a way that we can collect more data from a broader community, or have a way to have the people to document this kind of experience, like some kind of racial type of slur or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intent is to continue the Wayland Lived Experiences project, the survey, and hope that the newly formed HR DEI group will look to it to be able to inform where issues are happening, and to hopefully be able to place appropriate resources and education and education. I do think, because it is similar to Needham's, I think that there's an opportunity to even cross and understand what and compare what's happening in other towns, because they are similar.
Yeah, you really did a wonderful job. It's very hard to do, but like I have many contacts with Chinese-oriented, especially new immigrants here. So we definitely could help to get more people involved in your survey.
That would be great, because that's where I think, because it was just it was really promotional efforts were through kind of word of mouth and from the group of concerned citizens, that there hasn't been a lot of promotion around it. So the more people that are aware, that can actually share the link, and that there is an interest in understanding and learning about these experiences, I think that would be a good thing.
Okay,
The more information we can collect, the better.
Sure.
If I could jump in just for a quick second here. Our group, our Wayland, have met with various people, activists throughout the area, including Wellesley, who's been doing a lot of great work. And if you recall, they just had a march that was on the marathon route, and it attracted 1,000 people. And they're also in the process, or they've already begun collecting much of the information and so forth. So we have been cooperating with them, and we will continue to cooperate with them, and we will reach out to neighboring towns, as you suggested, like Natick and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the great work.
Thank you.
Great. And next I see Barbara. Barbara, you're up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Terry, for your personal remarks, as well as Margie for her presentation. We don't hear these things enough, especially the ones that are at home and personal. Do the schools have, as part of their curriculum, programs that address prejudice and actually how others are hurt? I don't know. My children did not grow up in Wayland schools. I don't have much contact with the schools. This commission or committee that you're part of and that Richard seems to be director of, doesn't seem to get much press. I don't read the Wayland newspaper, but I haven't seen it in the Globe. So again, what's happening in the schools in terms of education and more press for your committee or commission? Can anybody tell me what's happening in the schools?
Anne, do you want to answer that? Yeah.
Yes, I do. I was in touch with Betsy Gavrin at the middle school, inviting her to come to this event, and she couldn't, but she did tell me this, and I will read her email. She's sorry that she couldn't be here, but she said, we typically have Japanese internment survivor Mei Tagayanagi present to our 8th graders each year. Paired with that presentation, the 8th grade also sees Theater Espresso performing Justice at War, the story of Japanese internment camps. It is an interactive reenactment of Mitsui Endo's case heard before the Supreme Court, which challenged the constitutionality of internment. It is quite powerful and leads to excellent discussions. So, I mean, I was very pleased to hear that. I'm always trying to get into the schools to, to try to see how things are going. And as I mentioned earlier, certainly during my day, we weren't learning all of this stuff. So I'm hopeful with that. We also have a wonderful diversity person here in Wayland, Caroline Hahn. She works with all the schools, and she is very good. I think she had another presentation she gave herself on Heritage Month here. And I also know that, the library is running a social justice type book group where different books are being written about this. And I do know that there are a lot of books available, both fiction and otherwise, on the internment camps. And at the corner of Bitter and Sweet was one I read years ago. That was a fictionalized version of what happened and what I talked about earlier. But so yes, and also just Barbara, to tell you, not so long ago there was a wonderful petition put together by high school students here who wanted to see more people of color in their classrooms teaching and reading more books that were written by people of color, and movies, and really asking for it all. And I know I was one of the, I think, over 1,000 people who signed it. And I don't know, where that is or what's happened with it. But I guess I just want to say it is something to try to hang on to, but also know that we can influence the schools. We can, especially people who have children in schools, we can, ask school committee members questions and try to make a difference. But I did want to read what Betsy had said. And I think we should constantly try to get our way into really connecting with the students and having them come to events like this. Thank you.
Okay. To backtrack a little bit to what we had met with Caroline Moon as a group, and while I don't want to speak too much for her, she did mention that at the peak of the Asian hate crimes against Asian, and it's still going on right now, but a few months ago, many of our students were expressing to her the disappointment that they felt that this was not being addressed in her schools. The adults weren't talking about it, and they were very perplexed as to why, because everyone was talking about George Floyd. Everyone's talking about, the injustices that were happening against rightly so, the African Americans, and yet no one was talking about the Asians. So they were very disappointed in that. And as you know, again, as a reminder, Asians represent the largest minority bloc in our town. So they're especially disappointed by that. So I think Anne is completely right. We have to be our own advocates, and we have to ensure that this is being talked about, that our children are feeling safe, and not just safe, but feeling safe to speak out when these things happen. And it's just such a structural challenge for them to speak out and not face retribution or from even administrators that are meeting really well, but somehow may not be properly sensitive to the issues that Asian Americans are facing.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think you make a lot of great points there. And thank you to everyone that's participated in Ask the Questions. I think that we've gotten a lot of really great participation from the group, and I think we've asked both of our presenters some very meaningful questions. So thank you to everybody that's asked and shared their opinions. So it is 5:55 right now. We do want to have the appropriate 30 minutes for the breakout rooms. We're going to go well beyond the 6 o'clock time frame that we had set for the event, but I think that this has been a great event so far. So Libby, if you'd like to explain some of the background, the breakout group room norms, and then I can work on getting everybody sorted out into the rooms. So we'll go the full 30 minutes on the breakout rooms, and then once the breakout rooms are done, everybody will come back to this format here, and then we'll finish off the event with the musical performance by Mina Cho. So Libby, if you could please.
Sure. I was actually going to ask if we want to have the breakout rooms. I think we've had a lot of great discussion. I can see that people are maybe dropping off the call. I don't know if it makes sense to even go into that, or if people just want to have a larger group discussion some more. I don't want to take up people's time, basically. I don't know what other people on the
Yeah.
I would suggest we would just stay here and talk, like have a small town hall type of a discussion. Libby, you're very observant. I am also seeing a lot of people drop off. So it seems,
So can I ask, I think that's a great idea. Can I ask this, as far as what the next event is going to be? Would you like to have the musical performance first, and then that I think that runs about 5 to 10 minutes, and then anybody that would like to stay after, we'll give it to about 6:30. We'll have that town hall style discussion as opposed to the breakout rooms. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
So does anyone have any comments or anything or objections? And if not, then I would just transition to introducing you to Mina Cho.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So Mina Cho is a classically trained jazz pianist and composer. Mina is a faculty member at Emerson College, the director of what is called Gugak Jazz Society, an international jazz ensemble with whom she released a CD earlier this year, and the founder of International Gugak Jazz Institute. She holds a Master's of Music and a doctoral degree in Jazz Studies and Musicology from the New England Conservatory of Music, a bachelor's from Berkeley, and a BA in Theology from Yonsei University, which is in Seoul, South Korea. She has served as the director of contemporary music at Somerville Community Baptist Church since 2007. I think I can speak for me now when I say this dedication includes all Asian women whose lives were lost in the Atlanta hate crime. So let me see if I can find, here we go.
Hello, my name is Mina Cho. I am a jazz pianist, composer, and the director of the Gugak Jazz Society. This is my great honor to be able to share my music with the community in Wayland today in celebration of Asian American Heritage Month, especially in dedication to the Korean women killed in Atlanta. The song I'm going to share with you today is called 상여 소리, meaning funeral song. I composed this song inspired by a Korean traditional funeral song from Gyeonggi province as a part of my pansori cantata named 길령전, meaning the dream of Gilyong. Pansori is a Korean musical storytelling genre, and in my pansori cantata, the main character named Gilyong, who is a blind pansori singer, sings this funeral song to bless the soul of Jesus who died on the cross, and to bury her old self as if she was given a second chance. The rendition you'll watch today is a new version in which our vocalist Nara Lee wrote new lyrics to console the spirits of the COVID-19 victims and to give a hopeful message to everyone who is going through a hard time under the pandemic. This is my hope that the beautiful Korean melody and the hopeful message that the funeral song carries can resonate with your hearts, and especially with the family of the Korean women killed in Atlanta. Thank you so much again for your warm invitation, and I hope you enjoy the music.
천지간의 어둠이 내려앉아 드문 불추리오 곳곳이 넋이로다. 괴로울싸 어이할까마는 상여의 어둠 너 가득 눌러 담아 풍망산천으로 영 보내버리세. 이거는 산천 초목으로 돌아가거나 나는 꽃 난다. 너희놈 찬호
That was excellent. Thank you for getting in touch with Mino, Richard, and I think that was incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so too. When we talk about traditional music, when we talk about Asian music, I think we have this notion that music is static, and it ceases to evolve. But what is happening now in Asia in terms of new forms and new genres that are emerging that synthesize both the greatness of American jazz and the greatness of traditional music is just something just really, really incredible. So that's what we have to look forward to, and that's what multiculturalism gets you.
Yeah, that was great. So I'd say at this point, we'll open it up for discussion. We have about 20 minutes left. So whatever the remaining members of the event want to talk about, let's open the floor up for discussion.
This is Ingrid Jordan. I don't have the feature to raise my hand, so I apologize if I'm just talking.
Oh, absolutely. Please proceed, Ingrid.
I don't have a question, but I think that Miss Margie left. I just wanted to thank our speakers, and I've been just so moved by everything Margie and Terry have shared with us. You're truly treasures, and you're truly brave and courageous and inspiring, and I am just so moved as a woman, as a person of color, as an immigrant, that you will take the time today to share your stories in such a way that I feel that, and I feel just by watching everyone's faces that being transformational for us. And I know someone asked, what can you guys do? What people can do to overcome this experience if this ever get easier? And I just wanted to say that I think based on my personal experience and seeing what you guys have done also through your lives, I think the best healing comes with action. And by you taking action and speaking up and sharing this, the ripple effect of your words, like even just being here with us, is immense. We can measure it. And I cannot be more grateful and more honored and more proud to be part of our Wayland group that put this event together, and also to have the best speakers that we can ever imagine. Richard Lee did an amazing job also bringing this musician. I think that all the emotion that I had contained through these talks just came out listening to this music. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for enlightening us. Thank you for enriching us. Thank you for making us better people just by sharing who you are and what you guys have gone through. I'm very humbly grateful, and I just wanted to say that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ingrid. We couldn't have done this without you, really. I just wanted to go back a little bit. About a month ago, when we began discussing this and talking about whether it would be possible for us to put on something with such short notice for Asian Heritage Month, it was Ingrid who really pushed us and said, "Let's do it, guys." And she's been such a great leader, and just she's so passionate and so articulate and so intelligent, and we couldn't have done this without you. So thanks to you, we did it.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
I see. I'm sorry, I didn't want to, I don't mean to interrupt. Did you want to say something else, Richard?
Yeah, while I am expressing gratitude, I think it's a shame that a lot of the people have left already. But uh, there's so much gratitude and thanks that needs to go around here. Jordan, thank you so much for all that you've done. Louise, without her leadership, she's accomplished so much and she's going through so much with the town, with the water crisis, and and for her to be on top of this, it speaks so much to Janot, to Anne, Karen, Terry. Good God, Terry, as she'll tell you, had serious reservations about wanting to talk to us about this. But she found it within the goodness of our heart to share her experience with us, and we're so grateful. And Mr. Liu, Libby quietly has just keeps coming and coming and contributing, and same thing with Susan and the people who are not here, Nicole and so forth. So thank you all for this. This was wonderful. And lastly, while it's been a very difficult last year, filled with violence, filled with seclusion, isolation, and so forth, the signs, Stop Asian Violence, hashtag Stop Asian Violence, that are sprouting up all over the yards of Wayland have been such a boost to our morale, and such a comfort that people, so many people within our town, care and want to support us and know what is happening is wrong. So thank you, everyone. This is a great town, and all we're trying to do is make it better.
Yes.
Absolutely. And was there anything else you'd like to mention, Richard? Or I see we have a hand, looks like a couple hands up.
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Catherine, we haven't heard from you tonight. You can unmute yourself and feel free to express what's on your mind.
I'm so appreciative to hear people's history. And I know Jane Siaka, about 18 months ago, reached out to the Asian community and asked for them to share their stories and send them to the Historical Society so we could document them and keep them for future researchers. Unfortunately, we have not heard anything back, and I'm hoping this is an opportunity. People are sharing their stories here now, and I hope that they will write them down and send them to the Historical Society here in Wayland so we can keep it. Too often people say, that doesn't happen in Wayland. Well, it does happen in Wayland. And although it's shameful that it does, we need to tell our history. And if we could have these documents so that future people know the story and know how far we've come in the future in overcoming some of the nastiness that's been happening, it would be so appreciated. And that's at 12 Constituent Road here in Wayland, right next to the library. And if you don't want to write it down, if you want to talk to us so that we can write it down, we're available.
Right. Catherine, even if they were shy about giving their name, it would still be okay with you to receive the stories and stuff?
We would want their stories, because too often when people come to do research, we can tell them what happened in Boston. We have newspaper clippings in Framingham. We can tell them what happened in Chicago, but we can't tell them what happened in Wayland. And that's what's important, yes. So thank you for this opportunity to put a shout out for that. And I hope that the leaders will encourage their friends and neighbors to do so. Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Catherine, for highlighting, the role of the Historical Society, of the historical institutions in Wayland, to be part of this. It's really telling our story.
Anne?
I would also like to give a shout out, Catherine, to the Wayland Historical Society, because I have been working on not documenting. I have been telling the story of cross-racial, cross-cultural friendships that have always existed in our history for over 10 years now. And I have posters and but two of them have, I had 5 historical ones, history way back, and then we have 2 that are specifically Wayland race amity stories, very important examples of people opening up their heart to someone who looks different, sounds different, comes from a different culture. And, they are prized possessions, and we couldn't have done it without the Wayland Historical Society. We couldn't have done it without the research that Jane Siaka, Fran Pollitt, and others at the Society did for us and shared with me and us in order to document these in a form where they can be seen, at a public gathering. So I'm very grateful for all of that. And I say thank you to the Wayland Historical Society, and I hope we get to work on some of these other stories that I'm sure are there. So that's all I wanted to say.
Great. Does anybody else like to say anything, or any reflections, thoughts? Laurel?
Well, this is off the topic of today's session, but I was wondering if there's anything afoot to bring out some of the stories of the Indigenous people, especially in light of the rescheduling of the Patriot Day marathon on Columbus Day, which is now recast as Indigenous Peoples Day. I'd really like to see some town support for changing that date.
That's a wonderful suggestion, Laurel. And I think it's something that our Wayland group, perhaps we could collaborate with our Historical Society to see if we can tell some of the history. But I think there's also the story of today. And it would be wonderful if there were people of Native American background living in the community who would like to be part of planning that event. I think we need to find a way to welcome participation.
And Jenno, to piggyback on that, perhaps one of the things we as a committee could do, back in that day, it was Wayland and Sudbury were one. And if we could collaborate on that there, to try to find and document and expose and present these stories that were here, we could reach out to other communities too.
So I think the idea from the very beginning has been, Laurel, to celebrate and embrace and honor all multicultural groups living in Wayland and all ethnicities and all races. So we started with Black History Month in February, then we're doing Asian American Pacific Islander this month. We are planning an amazing event for race amity in June. And this definitely, thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is also another group that we would like to also celebrate and honor, absolutely. Then it will be a question for the group if we want to wait until November when it's actually the Native American Heritage Month, or we want to do something before, even include something in the race amity event, which brings together all those races. And so that is something that is very, very important, especially because of the foundation and the history that is involving there. So definitely in our radar, it's just a matter of tuning when, and hopefully that will be very soon.
Karen, did you have something to ask?
I
You had
did,
your
but
hand
I'll,
up.
I'll ask it offline. Never mind. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay, Susan.
I think hearing all this, what we've talked about tonight, and some of the examples about systemic discrimination, no one talking about it, groups targeted, the power this evening of facing it is just kind of jumped out. And so I thank you for that, everybody who was a piece of it.
Okay, so if no one else has anything, I think,
Yeah, so if anybody else would like to add anything, anybody that hasn't spoken up yet tonight, feel free to chime in.
Well, I'll just say thank you again, Terry. Thanks, everyone. I do have to get going. I'm going back to teaching in-person learning tomorrow. So it's our first day of in-person. So I have some things, very excited, some things I have to prepare and get ready for. So I'm going to get going.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks.
Nice.
Good for you, Libby. Thank you for all you do, Libby.
Oh,
yes, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And I'll just say thank you for letting me be part of the event.
Oh,
No,
thank
no.
you. Thank you,
Thanks for
Terry.
joining us.
Big hug. Hugs, everyone. Bye-bye. God
Thanks,
bless.
everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
Good
night.
night, everyone. Thank
Good
you.
Bye. Thank you.